Hello and welcome to the PhD Life Raft podcast. I'm Emma Brzezinski and today I am talking to the wonderful Selina Busby and we're talking about dyslexia and the PhD. We talk about the challenges and the opportunities of being a neurodiverse academic, and we also talk about teaching James Corden. So I do hope you enjoy this episode. Hello, Selina.
Hello, Emma.
I was just saying, I was been a bit giddy having a meeting up with you because we know each other from a long time. We're trying to work out how many years. It's just many years. It's mid-90s go back to.
A very long time.
Taught at Amersham and Wickham College. And did you teach James Corden when he was there as well?
No, I think I started just after James Corden left.
So yes. So me, Selina, James Corden, all at Amersham Wickham College. Together.
And Zoe Ball just before us too.
Did you?
Yeah.
Oh, we see. I didn't see Zoe Ball, but I did have the pleasure of teaching James Corden. Oh, bless him. Anyway, so it is truly lovely, and I really, really appreciate you taking the time. You are a super, super busy and awesome person, and I really am very grateful that you've said yes to come and talk today.
It's a joy to come and talk to you.
Bless you. And as I say, it's also made me a bit giddy, so I need to just kind of get down, get a bit more. I mean, I'm pretending that I'm professional some of the time, which isn't actually true. So we're going to get into talking about dyslexia in a minute, but I always start with asking people about their PhD journey, their experience of the PhD, and beyond, indeed. So can you tell us a little bit about your story, please?
Oh my goodness, the PhD story. Yes, I did my PhD part-time. I think that's still quite unusual. I was working full-time at Central School of Speech and Drama. For most of the time, I was a part-time PhD student. And that made some of the journey really pragmatic because although I'm an applied theatre practitioner and researcher, that means bringing lots of groups together. And it would have made sense to have done a practice as PhD research experience where I was working with groups of people. But I knew that I couldn't do that with my full-time job. So it became a very pragmatic exercise in thinking what type of research could I do alongside quite a heavy teaching load. And so I studied a very traditional theatre, really, main stage theatre productions between 1997 and 2003, and looked at representations of families in what I guess is often called in-your-face theatre. But that was actually being quite useful because I sort of got two strings to my bow, which in actual fact was a thing that Emma, you suggested to me a very long time ago to make myself.
That's really clever.
You did. You were brilliant. You said it's best not to pigeonhole all your work and research in one area because you'll be more employable. So I kind of have a theatre history side and the applied side. So I'm very grateful to you for that.
You're so welcome.
I guess that's the kind of background to it. I guess my journey was quite longer than most people, which was a joy in some ways and a frustration in others because of the part-time nature of it, and actually because of the dyslexia. I only discovered or was diagnosed. I'm not really sure that's the right. I'm not comfortable with that terminology really, but I only discovered that some of the quirkiness about my thinking and writing was as a result of having dyslexia just before I started the PhD process. So the process probably took longer because I was learning the best ways for me to do things which might not necessarily be the same way that everybody does them. So it was quite a long journey. And at some points, like everybody else, intensely frustrating, and in other times an absolute joy. I think my journey was a real joy when I was doing the research and the thinking and the making the connections and the reading. It was definitely less of a joy when I started the writing process properly.
I love that you said joy a lot of times. We don't hear that enough around PhD discussions, and there is joy in there.
There is
to
joy.
Be found.
Yeah.
To be found. And I think also your passion about your subject and what you do just shines through in all of your work. And I kind of that's something that characterises you to me.
Oh, thank you.
You're so welcome. You're so welcome. It's so lovely to have you here. I'm so excited. So we're going to talk about dyslexia, and just before we came on, I was kind of saying, well, how can we frame this up? Because it's and you were saying about it being really the possibility as well as the challenge of it. In fact, as I said, I was going to ask you to say that again. So, Selina, how can we frame this up? In terms of discussing dyslexia, and how do we frame it? Because it's doing a PhD with dyslexia, or how would we frame that?
I guess that's it. I more and more I think of it as being that I'm neurodiverse, or I have a neurodiversity, and that's important, I think, because and when I'm working with students, I definitely say, hands up, I am dyslexic, and that is going to affect the way I teach and the way I work. And I do that very strategically now, which I wouldn't necessarily have done in the past. But the neurodiverse label is really useful, because it's that labeling thing. If you label somebody as being dyslexic, a dyslexic student, a dyslexic researcher, that comes with a lot of baggage. And we tend to see it as a negative thing, or a thing to be worked through that's a challenge. I think one of the really useful things to do is think about it as a neurodiversity, because it just means that I think differently and I work differently. And there are definitely aspects of being dyslexic that make me a stronger researcher and are an advantage. And then there are things that are more challenging that I have to work around or find my own ways to work. And the two balance each other out in different ways in different parts of my work, I guess. One of the things, the way that my dyslexia works, and dyslexia is a very broad label, so everybody is so different. But for me, what I've learned is that part of my creativity comes as a result of the dyslexia, and that's rooted in the fact that I'm very good at seeing connections between things that aren't necessarily apparent. I kind of see the big picture in a really complex, beautiful, dynamic way, and I will link things, and I will link people's reaction to things in ways that non-neurodiverse people don't do, because they think in a more logical, structured way. So one of the really beautiful things about it is I can make unusual connections and really follow those through in interesting ways. But my particular challenge is then structuring it in a way that other people can access it and understand it. And that would be the challenge that I have to, or have started to, or definitely started to, that I work with, if that makes sense.
It makes absolute sense. And I think this sense of the beauty of actually seeing the world differently and being able, like you say, that creative approach to things, which is such a gift, but also a challenge at the same time in terms of trying to get it down onto paper then, which fundamentally is the challenge of that writing up process of the PhD. So can you tell us a little bit more then about what that looked like on the PhD journey for you?
It's a really interesting question, because when I think back to the PhD was the start of a writing journey, and I finished the PhD saying I was never going to write anything that size again, and the complexities of doing it. And then within 4 years of finishing it, I'm publishing my first book, which has nothing to do with my PhD. So I've embraced that challenge in a way that I never anticipated I would. I think that's quite important, and I learned a lot of those things on the PhD journey and have continued to learn since. So there are definitely things that I would do now that I didn't do when I was doing the PhD because I didn't think I needed to. So it's an ongoing journey. I think my mistake when I was doing the PhD, and I do think of it as being a mistake, is I didn't access enough support. I kind of the diagnosis, and I don't particularly like that word, but the diagnosis was so recent, and it did two things for me. It made me go, oh my goodness, that's a shock. But it also made me go, hold on a minute, that makes so much sense. Now I know that. I know why I've been doing things differently all of my life. So it was kind of liberating as well as being a bit of a shock. But I was still quite resistant to getting support from a dyslexia support worker, for want of a better phrase. And now I wouldn't write anything without one. In fact, I've worked with the same woman now for 6 years, so she almost knows my work as well as I do, which is brilliant. So I struggled a lot with structuring when I was writing the PhD. I have a tendency to write things backwards, so I tend to start a paragraph with what should be the end of my paragraph, and I know that I do that, and I don't unpick what I'm doing. I'm assuming that those connections that I've made are obvious to everybody reading my work. And that's really not the case, and I learned that more and more. So I struggled a lot, and it did to do that, and it slowed the process up, and I became very frustrated with my inability to write in an academic way. And actually, when I started working with a dyslexic support worker, she enabled me to make the connections and make sense of what I was saying, and then could help me rephrase what I was saying or restructure what I was saying. So it's absolutely all my work. She just puts the emphasis in a different place. And so that's been really important to me. And since doing that, my writing has got faster and faster. So the PhD, I'll be honest, took me 8 years, which is a really long time. And then the book, the monograph that I just wrote, took 2. So the speed completely changed, and that's because working with her name's Tanya. Working with Tanya has liberated the way I write and sped it up considerably. So that's really key. And then so at the beginning of the process of writing the monograph, I was like, that's it. This is the only thing I'm ever writing now. I've got my monograph. I'm never going to do it again. And then next minute, I'm editing a journal. And I've co-edited a book that has 47 chapters from around the world, which is a dyslexic's nightmare, if I'm honest. Wow. And I'm just formulating the proposal for a second monograph. And that's all because of the support that I've got through Tanya. So she has absolutely revolutionized the way that I work. And I now use more software and strategies that speed up the process. Because the other thing that I mean, I've always loved reading. I've always been a dyslexic that embraces the written word, and not everybody does. But so I would read, but I can't remember what I've read 5 minutes later. Right. So in the PhD, I took copious notes. I underline everything. I would underline things, and then I would write notes in the margin, and then I would type the notes up, because then I'm doing each bit of information 3 times, and that helps me remember it. But what I'm learning now is that I can have software. It's not even neurodiverse software, just my regular computer will read me Word documents. So I have the computer read everything back to me, and I can hear mistakes that I'm making and catch where I'm not being as logical as I might be if the computer is reading to me. I also record my notes into verbally me reading them, because then that I'm still speeding up that process. So I'm doing it twice that way, and then the computer converts it into a Word document. So, and I was very resistant to all of those techniques. I was very resistant to speaking my thoughts to record them. And the wonderful Tanya sneakily recorded me one day when she was asking me to unpick a theory that she hadn't quite understood when she was reading it from my writing. She recorded it on her phone, and then she played it back to me, and she said, "You are so..." Sounds like I'm not being very modest here, but she said, "You're so articulate when you speak. you're losing that articulacy when you write. So just speak it. And so that's what I do.
Amazing. So big shout out to Tanya.
Absolutely. And other Tanyas, all the Tanyas.
And other Tanyas. Well, what I was going to say is, so often when I'm interviewing people, there are amazing people in their lives that are part of their PhD team. And I think it's amazing to have a PhD team. There's a kind of fallacy about this lone scholar. And actually, it's really cool to have a squad, right? It's good to have a team of people around you.
Absolutely.
And I think especially when they are really skilled, like having people who do exactly, they do a thing really, really well. Why would you not have them? Why would you not?
No, I agree. And I didn't have a Tanya in my PhD process, and I should have done. I did have a brilliant supervisor. The wonderful Helen Nicholson was at Royal Holloway, was a brilliant supervisor, but she also understood that I was doing things differently. And so we had very frank and honest conversations about why I couldn't produce a logical argument, so that she understood my neurodiversity at the time. And I think those honest conversations with supervisors are also really important. Your supervisor is part of your team and is your friend and confidant and academic advisor all rolled into one. And so I think that relationship with your supervisor is really important. And it would have worked brilliantly to then involve a support worker in that mix as well. I guess the other thing that I didn't have then that I do have now, and that I've really come to value, is the fact that having a copy editor is not cheating and is a really valuable thing. And I hadn't really understood what the difference between copy editing and proofreading was. And I was very fortunate that Central also recognises my neurodiversity and offers me Tanya's support for one thing, but also access to funds that I wouldn't otherwise be able to access. So they provided the money for me to employ a copy editor for my book. And that's another layer of the process that I think is really useful. And it just hadn't occurred to me that there are professional people out there who will help you will absolutely catch it when you're not making sense, or when you could say it more articulately, and they don't do it for you, but they make those moments obvious in a way that's really approachable and lovely. So if I don't necessarily for articles and book chapters, but when I'm writing something that's as substantial as a PhD, and when you're holding that thread of argument and conversation for so many words and so many chapters, I would absolutely use funds and the support that being neurodiverse gives you financially to employ a copy editor to help you go through that process in the last stage.
Amazing. And and when you do come to publishing, although now obviously budgets are push, so you don't always get a copy editor, but that would have been the standard practice, that you get someone to come in, that that they kind of that you have an editor, you work with an editor, that's what you do, that's the writing process. So again, I think because there is such shame around, and that, I mean, that's why we're talking now, that's what it's all about, in terms of kind of going, there's a process in here, and there's nothing to be ashamed about in this. Actually, there's joy, there's beauty, there's amazing working relationships to be developed. I love it. And I also want to just honour and note, first of all, that 8 years to do a part-time PhD when you're working full-time is not a long time, just putting that out there. But also to acknowledge that the way in which having those things in place makes the process much smoother, quicker, more pleasurable.
Definitely.
For you, and that you can be your articulate self in writing because of those things in place. I think you're right. I think the shame surrounding neurodiversity is real. It's hard in an academic environment to out yourself, almost, for want of a better expression. It is tough, and I guess that's why I was more resistant to having help during the beginning of the PhD journey, because I'd survived my A-levels, my first degree, my MA, without
being diagnosed and without having that support. And so I was a little bit of, I don't need that, but it definitely would have made the journey smoother and more enjoyable had I embraced that. And I guess now it's like, now I call it all the time. If I'm in a room, and trust me, I often am. If I'm in a room where somebody's neurodiversity is not being supported or catered for, that's not quite the right wording, but then I'll absolutely call it. So in meetings, if I receive meetings in a work capacity that are in a font, a serif font, or a stupid size font, I'll absolutely call it in the meeting and go, this isn't appropriate for neurodiverse people. And so it's almost become part of my mission as an academic to not let it slide anymore. And I make it a mission to, whenever I'm teaching, and actually wherever I'm teaching, is that very early on in a course or a unit, I will make some reference to the fact that I'm neurodiverse, because I think that allows more people to destigmatize and for people to feel comfortable going, no, I do need support and I'm not going to hide this. And it's not always easy. So I do kind of think it's part of my role to do that. Even with publishers, when publishers send you manuscripts, they're always in Times New Roman. And I just say, no, I can't do it in that. You need to change it. Got stroppy, I guess.
You so much. You're always looking to support others on their journey. That is your orientation, and it is amazing. And that you give your passion and energy to that, which I just love.
I fully accept that in many, many ways I'm very privileged, and I therefore have some limited ability to use that privilege to open the cracks, or not to open the cracks, but to prize cracks open as widely as possible. And I think that's really important. I'm just starting I'm not sure this is relevant to this conversation, but my new research thing is, I've always looked at social and spatial justice, and I'm now broadening that out in research terms to be cognitive justice. And it's become really important to me that I don't think you can have social justice, which is what applied theatre, my version of applied theatre, is about. I don't think you can genuinely be striving for social justice unless you also strive for spatial and cognitive justice, because everybody works differently, and that needs to be acknowledged in all sorts of ways and levels.
I love that so much. I want to have a discussion with you about Augusta Boal.
Yeah. Maybe this isn't the time for that.
This is not the time, so we need to stop now and have a conversation about that in a minute. But we do need to stop now anyway. But before we do, I'm going to ask the impossible question that I ask everybody in terms of, do you have, out of all of that, a top tip or some top tips for people to take away?
There are so many. It's really hard to reduce it to one or even a few. But my first one is embrace it. If you have a neurodiversity, embrace it. Work out really confidently what that makes you better at than non-neurodiverse people. Where does that give you different strengths, and where are the challenges, and how do you get support to navigate those challenges? And they'll be different for everybody. I also think the thing that we haven't talked about, we've talked about the writing and not necessarily the viva. I think not enough people realise that if they have a neurodiverse condition, again, not the right word, but a neurodiversity, then they're absolutely entitled to adjustments being made in the viva. And those adjustments are really varied, and some institutions embrace them and offer them automatically, inclusively to everybody. Some are really resistant to it. So for me, being able to remember what I said in chapter 1 of my PhD was impossible. I know the broad concepts, but I couldn't hold all of those concepts in my head at once. And it became more like a memory. The thought of the Viva became like a memory test, and that's not the point of a Viva. So if you know that that's one of the things that you struggle with, you're absolutely entitled to ask to have the questions 24 hours in advance. And there was a huge stigma for me about doing that, because people said that doesn't make it a proper Viva. That means that you're cheating. It's not cheating. It's that you're being allowed to have a level playing field with people who aren't neurodiverse. And that was a real key moment for me, actually, when I insisted that was followed through. That was really my moment of like, we have to change the way universities run. We have to change the way PhDs run to make it a more level playing field. So yeah, the shame and the stigma, lose it. Focus on the advantages that it gives you, and find the best solutions to get to the end point you want to get to, with the support you need in place to do that.
Hooray. And yes to all of that. Amazing. Thank you so much for your time, for your work, and for being an inspirational person. Thank you so much. And thank you all for listening.